I speak from two places, and I guess I've been realizing I need to give a bit of a government health warning when I come to do presentations, because I have my presentation and you have the PowerPoint. However, I have worked very hard to keep my spirit and heart and passion alive. So there are times that just takes over, and I may lose track or it may divert somewhere else, because that's what I'm feeling I need to bring to you today. So forgive me if I don't follow every single slide. And if I realize I'm out of time or running low in time, I'll just forward through them quickly so you can scan them, but you've got them to take home. But there's something that we're here for today, and I actually don't even know what it is exactly, because we're drawn out of a care for the spirit. If that's in the title of a presentation and you come and sit in a chair, something's drawing you here, and there's a conversation that needs to happen between us. I may know what it is. So thank you for joining me today. I may forget to keep turning to include all of you, so forgive me in advance. I want to give you the headline of walking with, I counted, it's been almost 600 people who have had cancer, one-on-one, in my office, behind the four walls of my little sanctuary. Some have done deep journeys, like the one that Jen and Rob did, that the book is narrating. Some have come for a session and found their spirits given just enough to go back into their life and their support networks. And some have come and it's not for them. There's a different path that they need to take, different supports, and that's okay too. But the headline of what have I learned from walking with people who live with cancer is that you're a human being who has to face the impossible task when you have cancer of confronting mortality. Our society does not like to do that. And you have to confront what that means for you personally. Some of you here may have lived this journey. And what I have the privilege of doing is grappling in the depths of despair with people who are faced with this enormous task. How do I live and find joy and peace in the day-to-day when I know I could die? It's a truth we all actually live. We don't get out of here alive, but most of us live without that pressing and compelling confrontation in your psyche as you go to sleep. How long do I have in this life with my family and my loved ones? Or how long do I have continuing to struggle and be alone, and maybe cancer's a welcome friend? We don't know what it brings to people. What I've seen from those journeys, and this is where the passion comes from, it's not just me, it's the 500 plus people I've met. Our human spirits are incredible, and there is a wisdom at the heart of life that shows up for us. Call it what you will. But if you look at nature, and this is one of the things we do in soul medicine support groups, look at nature, study death in nature. Is there, except for human created death, and nature's very cruel at times, but study death, it always feeds something else, always. In the native tradition, it is understood that the deer or the gazelle that gives up its life to the tiger or the lion is doing just that. It is giving up its life. It's actually intuitively chosen by the herd that that's the one that will feed the life cycle. Obviously, those are not thoughts running through the deer's head, but that is what a native person raised in the traditional ways understands or feels or intuits. We've lost this. Whether we want to believe it or not, it doesn't really matter. But what helps you or me when we're facing our mortality is what I'm concerned about. That's my business. What's going to give each person hope? So if you walk away with something, this is your takeaway. I start with that in case you don't get it through the presentation. Have faith when you're in front of people who are in despair, or when it's you yourself. It might be despair at the system. I have felt that many times. It might be despair in your personal life. When you face that moment, remember there is a web of wisdom, and it's your spirit connected to the whole of life that can give you breadcrumbs, and it will give you just enough to find the next step, and that hope will start to rise up out of the despair. That's the essence of what I have learned and what I want to share, and that's really at the essence of this presentation. So this is what I hope to cover. I'm going to assume we're all, is there anyone that, well, it's a difficult question, anyone that can't read? I get tired of people reading PowerPoints to me, so I'm just going to assume you can scan them, you can peruse them at home, and I'll pull out the salient points. So this is what we're covering today. And ultimately, the heart of this talk is how do we care for our spirit so that we can care for others. The Dalai Lama, when asked what surprised him most about humanity, answered, man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money, then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health, and then he's so anxious about the future that he doesn't enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he's never going to die, and then dies, having never really lived. What he's describing is a sort of what I call chronic despair that I think many of us touch into through our careers and lives. And at the heart of that statement the Dalai Lama has made is a loss of hope. What source is our hope? Ultimately, religious context can provide some answers for us, but they tend to sometimes lose meaning when we're the ones that are suffering. And then the spiritual journey begins. What source is my hope? And I looked up what does it mean from the Latin. I thought, I loved it. To hope is sperare. Desperare is to lose all hope. What is spiritual distress? It's becoming a clinical diagnostic. It's in a lot of literature. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of pioneers that are really trying to assert that spiritual distress is a clinical diagnosis. It is. I did a lit search, 57 articles on spiritual well-being, spiritual distress, and cancer in the last 2 years. It's a growing field because it's recognized. People who have lost hope don't do as well. So how do we foster it? I like to call it the dark night of the soul, and that really is a term that comes from the Catholic mystics, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, and they walked with people on these spiritual journeys and discovered there is a theme in the spiritual life. When you say, yes, I want to be a whole, spirit-filled, alive human being, at some point you're going to hit a crossroads, and that is going to mean you plunge everything into what would be called despair, emptied out. You become emptied out, and then the real work of spirituality begins. So spiritual distress is that moment when there's a radical loss of hope. And I've been working very hard in LRCP to try to find ways to trigger the front lines. You know, how can they recognize that being the moment and put them into the care of someone in the specialized role that can walk with them and grapple with the dark night in my service. But how do we also meet that person there when we are the first one on the scene, as it were, hearing the despair story? Hopelessness is the heart's failing struggle. It's a failing struggle to source meaningful hope. And that's what provides us with inner strength for your suffering. Viktor Frankl discovered in Auschwitz, when he was being tortured, he was a psychiatrist, he was taken into the camp, and he survived, his family did not. And he came out and created a whole new branch in psychotherapy and psychiatry called meaning making. What he discovered was they can't take my spirit. They can't take my freedom. And he was one of the narratives that sourced me when I first started working in cancer. It was, okay, so cancer is that for people. If he can do it, then let's see if we can find a way for those living with cancer to do that. And what would help that? What are the ingredients that help people with that process? That became my inductive study with the people coming through my door. Let's explore this together. And they became the teachers. Everything in this presentation is directly from the patients I've walked with to you, and my own sort of languaging of that. Religions, often spiritual care. You know, I thought it was interesting when Ev said, you know, she suggested to the group, what if you get spiritual care? Most of the groups sort of weren't interested. Think of the hang-ups we all have around spirituality and religion. You know, it's deeply embedded in our society. And there's been a change in the last 50 years where spirituality is becoming distinct from religion. So you have no idea if you're talking about spiritual care to someone, what they're actually hearing. So it's important that we all create language that's comfortable for us to speak about how do you source your spirit as you're living this? How do you source your hope? Is it helpful to have someone to talk to? Do you have someone you can talk to about that part of your journey? If we talk in terms of spiritual, religious, it's going to often put up barriers. And if you use those words, we have to add the caveat of what we mean. And I'm trying very hard to bridge that gap on the front lines. It simply will never generate a referral to any spiritual care provider. If you're lucky enough to have one in your programs, you will never get a referral by saying, do you want to talk to a chaplain? Or if they say yes, it's because they're coming from a particular paradigm. And it's not necessarily spiritual distress, you know. So we all have to create language, and I've worked hard to do that, and I'm sharing my language with you, so steal it, you know. I dance on my feet in sessions often. So religions offer potential answers, but then the journey begins when it's our suffering. Life gives you the existential challenges, and they become the crucible for your own struggle to find out what hope means. There's a lot of spiritual despair in our healthcare system. You know, we don't have to go far to find a parallel process with our patients. It's life that brings it to us, and I've really worked on my rant, you know, the system, the this, the that. Who is the system? It's us. It's us. So we get to change it. If you keep your spirit well, and you work with your patients to do that, we're changing the system. And we're infusing care of the spirit every day, every moment. That's where I ground my hope. And the human spirit is what gives the strength and the capacity to excavate authentic hope from the suffering experience. Authentic hope. That's bodied hope. That's the person when they walk in the room, and I say this to folks when they're leaving the soul medicine groups. Basically, the soul medicine process is, I realized after about 7 groups, it's affirming the spiritual eldership that people who have faced cancer and are living it walk into the world with. Spiritual eldership. They have to source hope every day. What's our society seeking? Why are we all buying books in chapters on present moment awareness, mindfulness awareness, being in the now? What is it we're hungering for? Something we've all lost in our society. What is it we're not giving our children? So the people who've lived and faced and looked at cancer in the eye and said, okay, you can take my life at some point, you might do that, but I'm going to live today. I'm not going to waste my breath. I'm not going to waste it over the small stuff. They're the teachers. And I've had the privilege of learning. So that's what the human spirit can do. They become people who embody authentic hope. And actually, there's a saying in Buddhism that says the enlightened one walks in the room, says nothing, and everything changes, and no one knows who caused it. Now, so if you've had a struggle in your life, and you've walked through that crossroads, and you've grappled with it, and you've gotten what life means for you out of it, you will be that person that walks in the room and says very little sometimes to your patients or your friends, and yet there's something that happens. That's the strength of the spirit. It's been called another vital sign. I agree. I'd love to have a conversation with CCO. This is the vital sign of spiritual distress, you know. This is one part of what I'm sharing today is the fruit of a focus group. So I got full-time hours in March. Let's call that a miracle. I think it qualifies, but I don't think Neil Johnson will be canonized for it. It was actually under Brian Orr's last month of his time there. And the heavens did open, and there was an opportunity, and it happened. So out of that, I looked at who've been my key referrers, who filled the practice, who filled the service that I could get full-time hours. It was 9 people who'd steadfastly been able to identify spiritual distress amongst the cluster of symptoms that are well documented that we call anxiety and depression and distress. They had managed to somehow figure out who should go see spiritual care. It was phenomenal. So I put them at a table. I said, what is it you see? Let's create a symptom map, because we've got this lovely algorithm now from CCO for anxiety and depression. Nothing about spiritual distress in there. Yet in my experience, those symptoms often have spiritual distress embedded in them. And that's the work I do sometimes with the people in social work. They go, okay, we've got you stabilized, but really this is the person you need to be talking to now. There's a soul journey going on here. And so this is one of the quotes from one of the surgeons in that focus group. A surgeon, see, the human spirit is alive and well everywhere. Spiritual distress is clinically diagnosable. The problem is there hasn't been the perfect tool yet. I'd love some dollars to go into that, because if we could spread that across the front lines, our jobs would all be a lot easier. But there's an irony that came out of the focus group that really, that's not the way to go. So here are some of the things that bring people through my door. The one I want to highlight, spiritual guilt, comes in many ways. So spiritual guilt can be in the form of, I've been so healthy. I've done yoga. I've eaten well. I've been a good person. Why has this happened? Those three statements are a spiritual paradigm. Think of the universe that's being described in that statement. I'd say this with no judgment, because in fact, if we all look into our own paradigms, you'll find your own paradigm. This is how we live in the world. We create boxes, and then they make us feel safe and secure, and that's how we cope, which is great. And then the shattering comes, and it has to change and evolve. So that person has to grapple with a universe that involves suffering without a cause. And aren't we all struggling with that? But that's a narrative that identifies as spiritual pain. The world I thought I believed in doesn't actually exist. That's anguishing for a soul. And then the work begins of recreating a paradigm that you can live with. Random tragedy happens. Cancer cells strike up in the best of people. So I could die despite trying to ward off death with doing everything possible. I'm still going to die. How do I reconcile myself to that? The other thing I notice is the positive negative. Jimmy Holland, a psychiatrist at Sloan Kettering, wrote a chapter in the 70s on the tyranny of positive thinking. And I didn't know this. I was already on my own little rant. I didn't know someone had said it before me. I was all deflated. But our psychiatrist said, Jimmy Holland, Helen wrote that, so you have to cite her. And I've met her. She's lovely, lovely, wise woman, in psychiatry at Sloan Kettering. And positive thinking, it's all very well, but what happens when your thinking is negative? What happens when you feel like you're in an abyss? So positive thinking is not going to get you out of that. It's about grieving. So there is a difference between despair and all those symptoms that cognitive behavioral therapy intervene for. Very, very well. But somehow underneath that is this despair journey. And do we know how to grieve? When was the last time you saw someone grieving openly? We're not a culture that's good at this. We don't have rituals. We keep it private. And many times I find depression in the cancer context is because the grieving hasn't been supported. The keening, the wail, the rage. Where is it? Done a lot of work in my life to get in touch with that in myself. That's how I've kept my spirit alive. And when we don't, the spirit gets depressed, it gets pulled down. Because our souls won't let us get away with not dealing with our grief. And our grief can be, the God I thought doesn't exist. The world I lived in doesn't exist. I'm going to die, and I'm not okay with that. There needs to be a space for those voices. So when you're in front of someone who's grieving or depressed, their spirits are depressed, what are you grieving in this moment? What is making you feel so sad? Reframe the language, and it will give the heart and soul a chance to tell its story. And once we start telling our story, the story that hasn't yet been told, then the spirit will start mobilizing, and you're feeding the spirit. In giving their hearts a chance to tell their story, you're feeding the spirit. Once the heart can tell the story it really needs to tell, then the spirit starts to mobilize. We don't need to be in the business of helping people. The human heart can help the person. We need to give an environment where it's safe to tell the story of the heart. You may not have much time, but you can honor the story with your presence and your eye contact and how you show up, because you know there's a story that can't be told, and you just put a hand on a hand and say, it's hard, isn't it? You know, it can be done in a very short space of time. So authentic hope is actually grounded in the struggle with the despair. So another takeaway today, when you're in front of someone that's in despair, you will feel spiritual pain. You will feel your own existential struggle in front of them. You will feel emptied out. You will feel inadequate. You will walk away going, could I have done more? Could I have done better? Oh, I said the wrong thing. I do. I still do. What that is you've been with someone in radical struggle. And radical struggle levels the playing field, and we all become very human. And all we need in that moment is a presence, someone that understands what it's like to feel those feelings. And they're hanging in there with us for 3 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, take an extra half an hour, whatever your heart guides you to do. And that presence is the medicine. That's all that's needed for the human heart and the human spirit to get fed just enough to give the person enough to keep going. And you'll see that in the narrative in this book. If you read it, you'll see how that's basically the message, right? Just stay with the feelings, stay with the feelings, stay with the feelings, stay with the process. Life will show up, a breadcrumb will show up. It did. It was amazing. And I've witnessed that over and over and over. So now I have a body of wisdom from many human beings to say, I believe that's true. That's what wisdom is. When we struggle with what hope means for us, and we are forced into it as healthcare providers, you have chosen, and you signed that dotted line with your paycheck on it. You chose to be in front of human despair and suffering. You chose for a career that was all about suffering. And we didn't think of it like that, did we, when we started? And when we hit our first burnout crisis, we wondered what on earth happened, you know? But that's where wisdom comes from. And if we need a healthcare system in the future, and I can almost guarantee, you see if I'm wrong, but it'll be privatized at some point, we cannot sustain what we've got. It's going to radically change in our lifetime. And we all know on some level our children are inheriting a radically different healthcare system than we've had. What we need desperately is wisdom, wise people. How does wisdom get forged? It gets forged in those moments when you are in front of someone who's struggling and you have no clue what's going to help them, and you feel radically inadequate, and you stay and you offer your heart and your presence. You may say nothing, but you stay. And you sit with them in that moment. And then both of you walk away with something. You may not have words for what that is, but you walk away with something. And when you hit your personal crises and your life crossroads, because we'll all have them across a career, you go in and you grapple with your spiritual questions and your despair, and what does life really mean? And what do I want my children to know about it? Other than it sucks, kids, suck it up now. Get on the treadmill. You know, we have a responsibility to the next generation. They need wisdom. And they're not buying what the boomers in our generation bought, that it's all about being happy and having money and houses and things. They're not buying it. And our healthcare, if we want to be healthcare, not body care and body treatment, needs wisdom. Where does it get forged? What I have learned is it's in the despair moments. It's a gift. But I never call it that because it never feels like that. And when it's me, it sucks. It sucks. And we want to run. However, can we stay just long enough to get the breadcrumb? And then you may have a crumb of wisdom. And each of you here has wisdom because you've been in front of suffering and despair through your careers. You're in healthcare for a reason. So what I want to offer you is keep speaking it and don't give up. Even when your colleagues go, here she goes again. Helen's going on to the CCO panel. And I mean, they love, we have really good relationships, right? But it's like, yeah, here I go again, but I won't stop. Because look at the teachers we have. Who's changed this world? It might be Stephen Harper temporarily, but it won't be, he's changing a lot of Canada. Who do we look to as wise people? And I've put 2 of my patients, this is all done with permission. They're collages, we do soul collages, things that make you feel alive. What are your soul medicines? And they collage them. They go through magazines. It's a great exercise. Try it. If you do counseling or you're a nurse in the home, offer it as an intervention if it feels right. To get the focus off the struggle and the sadness, like what's going to feed your spirit here? And if you don't know, flip through magazines and grab what grabs you. And then paste it on a Bristol board. And people say, oh, I'm not artistic. And it's like, it doesn't have to be. It's okay. It can be as messy as you like. And then they have this little icon of what feeds their spirit, and then it sits in their houses. And I've yet to see someone's board be all about cancer. Sometimes it's the backstory. But it's such a profound experience when they share it. What they're sharing is the strengths of their spirit, and it's in a mirror. And these are some of the statements people have made at the end of soul medicine groups. But again, this isn't about my work. It's actually trying to share with you, this is what you're doing every time you choose to stay with someone that's struggling and be present. We're giving them the medicine of compassion and presence. And that's really all that's truly needed by the human heart and spirit to experience some of these things. And this isn't where they live forever after soul medicine, because I do stay in touch. This isn't where people live. It's not where all of us are living. That's the tyranny of positive thinking. There's a place I'm going to arrive at that I feel better, and I don't feel like life's a struggle. That's what positive thinking wants to believe. And we'll have moments of that, but we are human, and we struggle and suffer, and we will die. How do we integrate all of that? And so these have been my teachers, right? How can I become less easily affected by others' opinions? Can I be less stuck in fear? We do a fear study. What are the tentacles in your life of fear? And they share in pairs. Do that with a good friend. Do a study on how fear influences you in the day-to-day. It's phenomenal. I did it for a year after I started doing. I teach before I do. So I said, okay, cancer's all about fear, so let's look at it, people. And I'm like, wait a minute, have I looked at that in my own life? No. I studied my own fear. Fear of job loss, fear of people's opinions. I studied how it formed symptoms of anxiety in my chest on a daily basis, walking down LRCP's corridors. Study fear in your life, and then you'll find what's draining you. And then you can start working on your antidotes. Fear and death are great teachers. So this is Jen and Rob's story. To reframe that fatal moment when the doctor tells you the news. Jen writes in her introduction, Rob was 47, Jen was 36, I think. They had 2 young children, 2 older adolescent and early 20s children together, blended family. Absolute beloveds of each other. And Rob's 47, and they were given the diagnosis of metastatic pancreatic cancer. I've reflected a great deal on the wonderful gifts that came our way in the last year of Rob's life, and the most precious was perhaps the gift of a terminal diagnosis. Rob and I knew and accepted from the moment we learned it that he would die from his disease. Knowing its terminal nature and never allowing ourselves to play the 1 in a million game of hoping against hope for survival forced us to clarify our priorities instantly. If we had dared to feel even a slim hope for cure, it would have been so easy for us to wait for the go-ahead to live each day as if it was our last day together. We did not do that. We always lived as if it was the last day. When I faced knowing I had only a very short time with Rob remaining, it made it very easy for me to suspend my career and focus my time and energy on him. It allowed us to make treatment decisions considering not slim survival statistics, but quality of life. It made it easy for Rob to focus on living and on enjoying his time to the fullest. So how many of us, or doctors, when they're sharing the news, or you're a nurse in the room, or you're following up after, think of the terminal diagnosis as that, but it is true. In some ways, those journeys are easier than the ones that have hope against hope. We can stave it off, be on this regime, that regime. And that's driven by patients. It's not just doctors, it's not us pushing it. It's driven by people, and we honor that, right? That's absolutely valid. But here's a couple that said, that's not for us. We know what this means. And so the journey began with, how do we do this? What I realized, because I'd read just before I started the cancer program, that death is the greatest teacher. And your greatest enemy is your greatest teacher. So apply that in your system lives of who's the most greatest irritant. There's your teacher. What is it that's being learned? Well, your own patterns and defenses, but also that's where the struggle is, so that's where the life wants to grow. So they came saying, how do we live each day without hope of survival? It was a profound journey. So study fear in your life and make death your teacher. It's a meditation. Stephen Levine has a book called A Year to Live. It's daily meditations on death. Far from morbid. By the end of the year, most people who do that find they're really living in a way they never did before. It doesn't have to be a fatal illness that sort of brings us to that. So try making death your teacher. If death was happening for me tomorrow, what would today look like? What would I focus on in my work? Who would I go see? Profound teacher. How do we meet the person in despair? I've kind of given it in a diffuse way. Ground yourself in these two awarenesses, and these are your takeaways, and really what I've learned. I can be very eloquent, I can help people in lots of different ways, but in the end there's two ingredients that I think are the really key medicines, and they diffuse every encounter or session that I meet people in. Death and grief are not harmful. So when you're in front of that despair or that terminal diagnosis, don't buy the story that death is the enemy. It's not. Carl Jung said, death is the greening of life, and when I study death, the blossoms break open. It's true. You might want to think about that and integrate that. So yes, it's grief, heartrending, shattering, and yet there's something that happens when death comes to us, and many of you have done very sacred journeys with people. Well, that is possible, so hold that in your awareness. This is their moment to grapple with this deep spiritual struggle now. It's their life, it's their journey, and you're present in it fully with your heart open, but it's theirs. And this doesn't need to harm you, it doesn't need to harm your children. Death doesn't harm children. It's part of life. What are we teaching them? Integrate it. The second awareness. The suffering and despair is the crucible of wisdom. That individual you're in front of that's in despair is in a moment where their spirit is calling them to listen to it and receive the wisdom that lies within them that they haven't yet connected with. There's wisdom there. They're learning about who they are as a human being and what can rise up from within them. You hold the awareness that they can do it. You don't have to be a cheerleading coach. That would be very annoying. This is where your hope lies, people. It's not that. It's about the kind of awareness you bring to the room. It's about sitting with and being with and feeling that despair feeling in yourself. I met Jen and Rob. Donna was there for the first moments. In that hour after you left, Donna, when Jen looked at me, tears. How do we do this? My thought was, I have no idea. And I felt so empty. Who am I to offer anything, What do I have? But what I've learned, and this is part of our training in spiritual care, is you stay with that feeling in yourself. There's the seed. First of all, there's the resonance and compassion. I understand how you feel because I'm feeling it with you. And then you sit in trust and stay with the narrative, stay with their story. Keep asking the story to tell itself, and then will come the thread. And out of that session that visit came a thread, their love. That was their strength. And it had this quality to it that drew me, and I felt hopeful when I heard it. And I've learned over years of doing spiritual care, that's the deer in the forest that you stalk. So tell me more about your love. Tell me how you met. And so as that narrative started to get related, there was the love. There was feeling of of connection, there was the strength. And there was where the words that I offered them after that came from. And if there is no narrative because the grief is too great, do not ever forget the fact that you were present to it will have changed that person's experience of it, even if you're leaving their house or their bedside or their clinic in that state of grief. Never doubt you've made a difference, because we in the front lines in counselling hear it. That nurse, that doctor stayed. He was so kind. It was so comforting. We hear that it makes a difference. This is what we can offer. Kids know how to do this, right? It's really simple. Care for the spirit. When you're present, you're doing that. When you're connected to your feelings in the moment, you're doing that. You can read that at home, because I'm aware time's ticking. Read that quote at home. It's a really amazing quote. Real care of the sick doesn't begin with costly procedures, but with the simple gifts of affection, love, and concern. When we talk about spiritual care, that's really the heart and soul of it. You, the human being, the heart that is feeling with, the hand that is reaching to care and not hurrying, that's the medicine. That's why we have any integrity calling our healthcare system healthcare and not body care. Presence, silence, touch, all those subtle ways that you give a person dignity in the most undignified situations, recognizing that they are suffering and not just kind of shutting down on them. And just remember, when you're feeling inadequate, know what you do. Know what your patterns are when you're in that state of struggle. Do you speak more quickly and rush from one person? Just track yourself and then work on being mindfully present. When you care for the human spirit, you can mobilize the most powerful thing that's going to help that person, which is their spirit and the wisdom of life. That's my message to CCO. It really is. That's where, if we put our dollars there, I think our actual medical care treatment pathways would become more efficacious. That's my sense, who knows? And here's the thing. When our hearts are too full of stories and suffering as caregivers, we have to shut down. I'm a little tired of the, "You're not being caring enough" message, And that's something leaders really have to be aware of. If you've got people that aren't giving good care, ask why. How overloaded are they? Why are their hearts not expressing compassion anymore? Because we're too full. We've been in front of too much suffering, and our spirits need feeding. And yes, we can say you have to do that on your own personal time, but we spend 40 hours a week at our workplaces. So how do we do that in our daily lives? I ranted a lot about the system not helping us with that for a while, and then I got sick of my own story. Okay, Helen, back up here, take charge. How do I care for my spirit in my day-to-day? And you know what? There's actually 1,000 ways you can do that. 1,000, if you look for them. So follow your own despair and struggle, and then ask, this needs to change, and how? How do I do this? And then you'll find the breadcrumbs will start showing up for you, and you'll discover you can just look at the fields whilst you drive to the next patient's house instead of, "Oh my gosh, I'm late," Our burnout impacts our patients, we know that. So heart care and health care is critical. And here's just a message of hope if you're talking to your leaders. I've been on this kick for many years in healthcare. You have to care for your staff. It's not extra dollars that no one has. You want healthcare? Care for the hearts and souls of your staff in efficacious ways. Doesn't take a lot, but it's finding what will help your staff. One size doesn't fit all. What will help your staff? What are your stories of despair and struggle? And then out of that, find the seeds of hope and where to target your energies. Because otherwise, we're not giving heart care in our health care to our patients. And then we get all the negative stories. So the story of hope is we've just been funded, 2 of us, to go for training the trainer on compassion fatigue workshops. after our hospital has shut down all funding for education opportunities. It was approved by our VP out of a recognition this is a good use of dollars for our staff. So take heart and follow your spirit, because it can mobilize dollars in ways you just cracks in the wall appear, because it's important, right? And you believe in it. My little checklist. How do I check in with my own spiritual pain? Because you will feel spiritual pain from being frontline care providers or leaders in a system. Everybody has pain because of what we do. My big one is joy. I got to happiness. I felt pretty happy. I'd worked through major depression. A little bit of my biography's in the book. I had a big descent 5 years ago, 10 weeks off work. It was my crawling through the depths and a real struggle. And so I reached a place of feeling good with myself, and I'm pretty happy with my life. And then I thought, do I feel joy? Like, I read about joy. What is that? So this last year, I set myself a joy project. I'm going for joy. How do I do that? Watch the breadcrumbs, right? So create your own project and look after your heart. Cases that haunt you, that's a flag. That's a flag. Are your relationships hurting? Take care of them. Take care of yourself in them. When you start giving extra, often, we all give extra, and there's reasons we do that, and it's needed. But when it becomes a pattern, just track your own behaviors. That, for me, is I've got a hole in my life I don't want to look at. The big black hole is looming, the existential abyss. One of the highest risks of burnout and vicarious trauma is a lack of value about you and your work. That's actually got good literature, which I will have after my Training the Trainer workshop. So what I've learned, there's no mommy out there in healthcare that's going to value my work as much as me. How do I source my own value? And then sow what you want to reap. So value others in 1,000 ways every day. Smile at your colleagues. Crucial appreciation. I've got a campaign. We've got crucial confrontations, crucial conversations. What about crucial appreciation? When you stopped and talked to me, Marcy, was it 2 days ago? I really felt filled for the next half hour as I was actually going to see someone in palliative care. That's crucial appreciation. Sow it, and maybe we'll all start reaping more of it from each other. It's concrete, specific feedback. If your heart felt warm because of someone, go tell them, and don't assume that they're feeling good about themselves. You know what I've learned about most of my healthcare colleagues? None of us are feeling good about ourselves. We're not feeling good about our work. Our system kind of creates this feeling of instability and lack of value, and it's a shared thing, and there's no one to blame. And in the end, that's usually a symptom of me losing source with my own sense of value. Too many losses, talk to your leader. I need a break. I need a break. My heart has to heal. Or if you've got staff that have gone through cumulative losses, there's no way they can turn around and keep going. So keep your eyes open for each other. Oh, other thing, as you go through life stages, when your father's diagnosed or your partner, those 5 cases that haunted you for a while but they're not live anymore, they're going to flood back. What I've observed in my colleagues is vicarious trauma is not something we necessarily feel often, or if we're not in high trauma, except cancer is a trauma. It is a trauma. So we're all in trauma work if we're dealing with cancer. However, what I've learned is when it's your personal story now, the vicarious trauma floods and you can't switch off the stories. So if you're going for a test, you're going to have the 6 mothers. If it's me, I'm going to have the 6 mothers I've helped die in my flooding my system. So go and get counseling. Go to someone you can work through those stories, because now's the time. It's raw and live. I've really discovered something around vicarious trauma and your own personal stories. We don't think we're vicariously traumatized until you stub your toe or something life-shattering happens to you. One of my radiation therapists, I stubbed my toe and I cried for 3 hours and I didn't know why. It's like, because you're overloaded. That's vicarious trauma. So some practices. They're in your thing. I won't go through every single one in detail. Moments, milestones, gems. Give yourself appreciation. What are your milestones? Celebrate the moments. Look at the flowers, look at the trees as you walk into work, look at the clouds. Really, really practice connecting with something outside of the walls. Another thing I've noticed, I give a crucial appreciation, what happens? Oh, it was nothing. No, no, no. I do it too. Oh, no. Great book, Helen. Oh, thanks. You know, we feel ashamed. There's a feeling of shame about being given credit. That's a societal issue. Take the credit. Look that person in the eye and say, thank you, and let it feed your spirit. Connection is what the human spirit longs for. We can handle suffering as long as we're feeling connected. If you're feeling disconnected from partner, life, spirit, whatever, you're going to be suffering. So find what makes you feel connected. A friend, comedies, good wine, good scotch. Love scotch myself. With a good friend, not by myself. Connection. It feeds the spirit. Watch your sense of connectedness. It's a good litmus test on how your spirits are doing. Mindfulness, it's a buzzword now, but take 3 breaths before patience. Feet on the ground. Just do it right now. Feet on the ground. This is my little trick. Half of LRCP practices it now. Feet on the ground. Imagine, if you just want to close your eyes and look at the floor, imagine you're breathing through your feet. Your mind's going to say, that's silly, because we're not. But just imagine it. Imagine you've got roots going down into that earth that feeds us. Picture the trees, they're giving you oxygen right now, and you are feeding them with your breath. The oceans are doing their oceaning, and they're releasing water that feeds us. Imagine you pulling all that web of life support in through your body, from your feet into your heart. And then empty out what you can't control, the stories of stress and fear, the suffering. You're not trying to get rid of it. We can't. You're just sharing it with the web of life, because there's actually a whole web of life out there that supports us. 3 breaths before you go in to see someone in a difficult situation, or even in the middle of a session or something where you're just kind of feeling empty. That's the Helen special. And it's a great way to stabilize someone if you're a counselor or a nurse. If someone's really traumatized or struggling, don't do feet on the ground. They'll go, what? Hand on your heart. Put a hand on there. Say, please put your left hand on your heart. Just imagine you're breathing into your heart, and I'm going to breathe with you. May I hold your hand for a minute? I'll sit here with you. We'll just breathe together, because there's no answer to this, but I can be here with you in it. This actually lowers blood pressure and reduces an anxiety response. Just hand on the heart. So that's another quick way you can stabilize yourself or someone else. And here's a big one. Transform the not enough into always enough. If we live the not enough, then I said this to, actually it was Grace, I said the nurse practitioner in the book, I said, Grace, if we don't learn to walk away from our desks with 6 patients not called, 500 pieces of papers not done, guess what we're going to be doing on our deathbeds? We're going to be lying there going, oh my gosh, I never called that patient. You know, that's what we're going to be doing. Because our minds, it's actually neural pathways in the brain, mindfulness-based brain stress reduction, mindfulness-based stress reduction has shown us this. It's neurological. Those are the thoughts you think 90% of your day, not enough, not enough, not enough. Guess what? That's the pathway your brain's going to go down no matter what. So really work on finding there's enough place, and I've worked on that. Look at people in the eye. There's always enough. There's always enough for all of us. I'm a big fan of get a counselor if you're in healthcare, someone to touch base with in the crisis hit. And have a good buddy. You'll intuitively know who that can be to do heart care with. How are you? How are you doing? How's it been after that loss? And don't slime each other with horrid stories either. We do that because we need debriefing so badly. It's like, can I just share a little bit about this case and you tell me when to stop if it gets too much? Give people permission. But even just a hand on a person's arm, you know. I was thinking about you today. I know you had a difficult case. Joy and Peace Project. Takes 3 breaths. Keep your souls alive. And we will be the best medicine we can be for our patients. Thank you.